My name is Kima, and my name is Native American Indian. I did some research into the history behind my name. It means in the wind, and interestingly enough, found out that it comes from the Karankawa tribe. They were hunters and gatherers on the Texas Gulf Coast, specifically on Galveston Island. As I was researching in preparation for this presentation, I also found an article located on the Houston Museum of Natural Sciences website summarizing the first American Revolution of 1680. The article stated that it was long before 1680 that the seeds of revolt were planted. In 1528, Alvar Nunez Cabeza de Vaca and 3 other Spaniards survived a shipwreck off the coast of Galveston. Hence the reason I shared the meaning and history of my name. I found it interesting that the seeds of revolt began so near here. Cabeza de Vaca and his men spent 8 years wandering west. They were captured, escaped, and eventually made it back to Mexico City. They had stories to tell about the Indians that they had encountered along the way. Cabeza de Vaca shared their experiences with the Spanish authorities, which resulted in the Spaniards sending a small expedition to the north. Leading this expedition was Francisco Vasquez de Coronado in 1539. By July of 1540, the Spaniards had reached the Zuni Pueblo Indians. This was the first contact between the Spaniards and the Pueblos. The full army of nearly 2,000 people, 350 Spanish soldiers, 350 servants and camp followers, and 1,300 Native American warriors from the New Spain, what we know today as Mexico. They arrived with herds of horses, cattle, goats, and sheep. At first, the Spaniards found the Indians friendly, but after wielding brutal authority and forcing Christian religion upon the Native Americans, they began to resist, resulting in the Tegex War during the winter of 1540. Coronado had ordered his men to take what they needed by force, stealing their food and leaving them starving, raping their women, maiming them, killing their warriors, and burning many men at the stake, ultimately desecrating the entire Tegex communities. The war with Indians in New Mexico and the many diseases that the Spanish brought later resulted in the abandonment of many of the pueblos. Afterward, Europeans were no longer welcomed at the pueblos and were often attacked. This, however, did not stop the Spanish missionaries and the many new inhabitants who would come later. In 1598, a major colonizing expedition and the establishment of settlements was launched by the Spanish. The function of the colonists would be to protect the missions and convert the Indians to Catholicism. This introduction of the newcomers brought many serious consequences for the Indians. The Spanish brought deadly diseases, and large numbers of natives succumbed to the germs that they had never been exposed to before. Massive population declines undoubtedly placed great stress on economic, social, political, and religious systems of the tribes. Cattle brought by the Spaniards also caused erosion and destruction of the Pueblo farmlands, as well as stealing their land and exploiting their labor. Within 100 years after the Spanish's arrival, disease and violence had killed at least half of the Pueblo population. Although the Franciscan priests initially tolerated the Indians' use of their religion, as long as the Puebloans attended Mass and maintained a public facade of Catholicism. Fray Alonso de Posada outlawed Kachina dances by the Pueblo Indians and ordered the missionaries to seize and burn their masks, prayer sticks, idols, and other sacred artifacts. The Franciscan missionaries also forbade the use of psychoactive drugs in the traditional religious ceremonies of the pueblos. Several Spanish officials, such as Nicolas de Aguilar, who attempted to curb the power of the Franciscans, were charged with heresy and tried before the Inquisition. The Inquisition meant persecution of all non-Catholics. Assaults on Pueblo religion created great resentment and anger. Franciscan priests established theocracies in many of the Pueblo villages. They relentlessly converted the Pueblos using intimidation and extreme violence to help build the Spanish Empire in New Mexico. In 1608, the priests feared that Spain would withdraw from the missions, and in an effort to convince Spain otherwise, they baptized 7,000 Puebloans. The Spaniards believed the Pueblos had to be converted to Catholicism and took drastic means to do so. A clash of the cultures. For nearly 4 centuries, the Spaniards sought dominance over the Pueblos and did so under the name of God. This was forced indoctrination of the indigenous people. The Indian population had diminished due to numerous massacres, diseases, forced labor, and a great drought. By the time of the revolt, the Indian communities had lost 43,000 men, women, and children. It became clear to the Pueblos that the Spaniards had to be driven out. Pope was born in 1630. He remained unknown until 1675, when he was arrested for participating in Indian sorcery. Pope, along with 47 other men, of which 4 were sentenced to death, the others, including Pope, were imprisoned for several years and were subjected to public lashings. In 1677, they were finally released by the governor on the condition that they convert to Catholicism and denounce their Indian religion. Pope spent the next several years spearheading and organizing an attack to regain Indian freedoms and return to their traditional way of life. This was no easy task, because the Puebloans spoke 6 different languages and had a long history of division. The colonists underestimated them and believed they could never unite and join in revolt against them. But how wrong they were. It was only a matter of time before the Puebloans would have enough of being slaughtered, being enslaved, and having their way of life stolen and destroyed. They, led by Pope, took a stand, rose up, and revolted against the Spaniards and the Franciscans. The Indians, speaking Spanish as a means to communicate amongst the tribes, united in revolt. The revolt took place on August 10th and it lasted for 11 days. The Puebloans joining the revolt had about 2,000 or more men using native weapons such as bows, arrows, and spears. The Puebloans who did not participate in the revolt were those more thoroughly indoctrinated into the Spanish culture and consisted of the mixed-blood mestizos and Indian servants. The Spanish were only able to muster 170 men and arms because of their army was away fighting the Apache Indians. With a vengeance, the revolting Puebloans took back their lands and fought against the Spaniards. With built-up rage for their many, many years of atrocities, they destroyed all symbols of European culture, their churches, their crosses, and anything that related to the Christianity. Pope even screamed, "The gods of the Spaniard is dead." The surviving settlers, soldiers, and friars fled Santa Fe, and the Puebloan way of life returned for 12 years until the Spaniards came back once again in an effort to civilize the native tribes.